The first warning came as a subtle vibration, so slight that most would have dismissed it as nothing more than a momentary technical glitch. But Captain Elena Rodriguez knew better. Her fingers hovered above the holographic interface of the new Santiago colony's Defense Control Center, muscles coiled with a tension that came from decades of military experience. 12 years of deep space colonial management had taught her that in the vast, unforgiving darkness between stars, nothing happened without reason. The vibration came again, this time more pronounced. Quantum sensors along the colony's outer defensive perimeter began to pulse with an unusual rhythm, a symphony of data that spoke of something massive approaching. "Sensor control, report," Elena commanded, her voice cutting through the background hum of technological equipment. Lieutenant Kai Chen, a young officer with eyes that had seen too much during previous border skirmishes, responded with clinical precision. "Anomalous hyperspace signatures detected, Captain. Multiple large-scale energy concentrations forming approximately 0.7 astronomical units from our primary defensive grid." The holographic display flickered, transforming from a standard colonial monitoring system to a tactical overlay. Crystalline shapes began to materialize, each one a nightmare of geometric perfection that defied conventional understanding of spacecraft design. The Caraxian invasion fleet wasn't just approaching. They were emerging with a calculated precision that suggested something far beyond standard military tactics. New Santiago was more than just another human colony. Established 32 years after the first interstellar migrations, it represented humanity's deepest push into the Orion Arm. Terraformed from a harsh, mineral-rich planet, the colony housed over 2.3 million people, researchers, miners, engineers, and their families. Generations had built their lives here, transforming an inhospitable world into a beacon of human determination. Elena's mind raced through potential scenarios. The Caraxian diplomatic communications had been tense but stable just 3 standard months ago. No indicators suggested an imminent conflict. Yet here they were, emerging from hyperspace with a fleet that seemed to have materialized from the darkest nightmares of strategic planners. "Defensive systems, full activation," she ordered. Her voice remained steady, a practiced calm that belied the storm brewing inside her. Automated systems responded instantly. Planetary shield generators hummed to life, creating a multilayered energy network designed to withstand everything from micro-meteoroid impacts to conventional weapon systems. But something in the way the Caraxian ships moved suggested these were not conventional weapons. Lieutenant Chen's console erupted in a cascade of warning signals. "Captain, their energy signatures are unlike anything in our database. They're generating quantum resonance fields that are disrupting our standard defensive protocols." The first salvo came not as a traditional energy blast, but as a wave of quantum disruptive energy that seemed to unravel the very molecular bonds of the outer defensive platforms. Shield generators that had been designed to withstand direct nuclear impacts simply dissolved. Not destroyed, not overwhelmed, but systematically unmade at the subatomic level. Evacuation protocols had always been a theoretical exercise for most colonial staff. Drills performed with a sense of bureaucratic necessity rather than genuine urgency. Now, those carefully constructed plans transformed from simulation to brutal reality. "All civilian transport vessels, prepare for immediate evacuation," Elena broadcasted across multiple communication bands. "Priority to children, medical patients, and critical research personnel." The colony erupted into controlled chaos. Families that had spent generations building their lives on this world now found themselves reduced to what they could carry in emergency transport containers. Scientists grabbed decades of research, miners secured critical data cores, and medical teams worked with inhuman efficiency to stabilize and transport the most vulnerable. Elena watched as the first wave of civilian transports began their desperate escape trajectory. Each vessel represented not just lives, but the accumulated dreams of humanity's expansion into the cosmos. Researchers who had spent years studying alien ecosystems, engineers who had transformed a hostile planet into a living world, children who had known no other home. All now became refugees in a conflict they never asked to join. The Corexian fleet continued its systematic dismantling of the colony's defenses. Each attack was a surgical strike of terrifying precision, removing defensive capabilities with a cold, calculated approach that suggested something far more complex than simple conquest. Something else caught Elena's attention. Among the chaos of destruction and evacuation, a pattern began to emerge. The Corexian attack wasn't just about overwhelming force. It was studying something. Every defensive system's failure, every communication network's disruption, seemed to be carefully observed and analyzed. As the last civilian transport cleared the planetary atmosphere, Captain Elena Rodriguez made a decision that would echo through the coming conflict. She would not simply evacuate. She would understand. The nightmare of battle had only just begun. The void between star systems became a graveyard of hope and survival. Commander James Chen studied the makeshift fleet through the reinforced view screen of the salvage carrier Resilience. What had begun as a desperate evacuation had transformed into something unexpected. A scattered but unbroken human resistance. 17 transport vessels, 3 research ships, and 2 badly damaged military cruisers comprised their current fleet. Each ship bore the scars of the Corexian attack, molecular-level damage repaired with emergency nanite patches, communication arrays cobbled together from salvaged components, life support systems running at minimal capacity. Chen's command center was a testament to human improvisation. Standard military consoles had been replaced by jury-rigged interface systems. Spare parts from mining equipment interfaced with advanced quantum communication arrays. Where military protocols would have demanded uniformity, this fleet embraced adaptation as its primary survival strategy. Status report, Chen called out, his voice calm despite the critical situation. Lieutenant Area Wong, the communication specialist who had become the fleet's lifeline, responded with a mix of determination and exhaustion. We've managed to establish a low-bandwidth communication network using quantum entanglement protocols. It's not stable, but it's something the Corexians won't easily intercept. The communication network was nothing short of miraculous. Traditional communication systems relied on predictable transmission methods. Area had developed a method that transformed each message into a complex quantum puzzle, fragments of information that could only be reassembled by those who knew the exact decryption pattern. "Show me," Chen requested. A holographic display flickered to life, revealing a spider web of connection points. Each point represented a surviving human vessel or colony outpost. Some were strong, others barely visible, but they were connected. The Corexians would see nothing more than random noise, but to human eyes, it was a lifeline of hope. Nearby, Dr. Marcus Rodriguez, the weapons engineer who had escaped New Santiago, was already dismantling a captured piece of Corexian technology. His workstation looked like a controlled explosion of circuit boards, alien components, and human engineering tools. "They're not just weapons," Rodriguez muttered, more to himself than to anyone else. "These are complex adaptive systems. Each piece is designed to learn, to modify itself based on encountered resistance." Chen understood the implication. The Corexians didn't just want to conquer. They wanted to understand, to categorize, to predict. Their technology was a reflection of their strategic mindset, linear, predictable, based on mathematical certainty. Humans weren't anything but predictable. A alert chimed. One of the quantum communication nodes had picked up a transmission. Not from a human source, but an intercepted Corexian communication fragment. Aria's fingers danced across her modified interface, pulling apart the encrypted message. "They're tracking us," she announced, "but not in the way we expected. They're collecting data on our survival methods, our communication patterns." Chen's strategic mind began to see the larger picture. The initial attack on New Santiago wasn't just about destruction. It was a test, a way to understand human response systems. "We need to give them something to analyze," he said, a plan forming. Over the next few standard cycles, the fleet transformed. Mining lasers were modified into potential weapon systems. Communication arrays became sophisticated jamming devices. Emergency medical equipment was adapted to create localized quantum field generators. Each modification was a deliberate act of defiance. Where the Coraxians expected standardized responses, they would find creative chaos. A young engineer named Samira approached Chen with a prototype, a device cobbled together from a medical scanner, a mining drill, and components from a communication relay. "It's not perfect," she explained, "but it can generate a quantum signature that mimics and then disrupts their tracking systems." Perfection wasn't the goal. Survival was. As the fleet continued its silent journey through the star-strewn darkness, something remarkable happened. The survivors began to share more than just survival techniques. They shared stories, memories of New Santiago, experiences that defined their humanity. A researcher would upload agricultural adaptation techniques developed on a distant colony. A medical officer would share psychological resilience strategies. A retired mining engineer would provide insights into material manipulation that could be transformed into defensive technologies. They were no longer just survivors. They were becoming something more. The Coraxians continued their methodical pursuit, collecting data, analyzing patterns. They saw a scattered fleet of damaged ships. What they couldn't see was the network forming. A human connection more powerful than any technology. The real resistance was just beginning. The research laboratory was nothing more than a converted cargo hold aboard the medical research vessel Horizon. Walls lined with emergency radiation shielding, equipment bolted down to prevent drift, cables snaking between sophisticated equipment, and jury-rigged power systems. This was Dr. Aisha Okoy's new world, a crucible of scientific discovery born from the ashes of humanity's greatest challenge. Holographic displays danced around her, each one a fragment of a complex puzzle that challenged everything known about interspecies psychology. The Coraxian attack had been more than a military assault. It was a calculated study of human response systems, and Aisha was determined to understand why. Her specialty had always been synapsological adaptation, a field that bridged neuroscience, anthropology, and interspecies communication. Years of research among distant human colonies had taught her that human beings were far more complex than any standardized psychological model could capture. "Computer, run comparative analysis," she commanded, her voice cutting through the ambient hum of medical equipment. The holographic displays shifted, revealing complex neurological maps. On one side, a Coraxian neural pattern, linear, predictable, with clear hierarchical decision-making processes. On the other, a human neural network that looked more like an intricate web, with connections that seemed to defy traditional understanding. The fundamental difference was stark. Coraxian cognitive processes were designed for efficiency, for predictability. Each neural pathway was a carefully mapped route with minimal deviation. Human brains, by contrast, were a landscape of constant adaptation, with neural pathways that could reform, redirect, and create entirely new connections in response to unprecedented challenges. A notification pinged. Another data packet from the scattered human fleet. A collection of psychological resilience reports from survivors. Aisha's algorithm began processing the information, looking for patterns. What emerged was nothing short of remarkable. Each survivor's psychological response was unique, yet collectively they formed a complex adaptive system. Where a Coraxian would see chaos, Aisha saw a sophisticated network of emotional and cognitive resilience. Take the report from Elena Rodriguez, for instance. Despite losing her entire colony, her psychological profile showed not despair, but a calculated determination. Her brain's stress response wasn't about survival in a narrow sense. It was about understanding, about finding a way to fight back. Another report came from a mining engineer who had lost his entire family during the initial attack. Traditional psychological models would predict complete emotional shutdown. Instead, his report showed a transformation of grief into a focused energy of resistance. Aisha began to see the human response as a form of psychological quantum mechanics. Emotions weren't just internal states, They were adaptive technologies. "They're studying us," she muttered, reviewing the intercepted Caraxian data streams. "But they don't understand what they're seeing." The Caraxian approach to psychological warfare was fundamentally linear. They collected data, predicted responses, developed countermeasures. Humans existed in a state of constant unpredictability. A breakthrough emerged from the most unexpected source. A collection of survivor stories, not scientific reports, but personal narratives. Accounts of loss, of hope, of unexpected moments of connection. Aisha's algorithm began to map something unprecedented. These stories weren't just communication. They were a form of collective psychological reinforcement. Each narrative shared created additional neural pathways in the collective human consciousness. Where the Caraxians saw individual data points, Aisha recognized a living, breathing adaptive network. Her research took a revolutionary turn. She wasn't just studying how humans survived. She was documenting a new form of species-level cognitive adaptation. The medical bay's door slid open. Commander Chen entered, his posture a mixture of exhaustion and anticipation. "What have you found?" he asked. Aisha's smile was both scientific and deeply human. "We're not just surviving. We're evolving." She pulled up a holographic display that looked more like an organic network than a traditional scientific chart. Neural pathways connected and reconnected, forming new patterns with each passing moment. "The Caraxians are looking for a predictable enemy," she explained. "But we're anything but predictable. Our greatest strength isn't our technology. It's our ability to transform trauma into adaptation." Chen studied the display, understanding dawning in his eyes. This wasn't just a survival strategy. This was a fundamental reimagining of what it meant to be human in the face of an existential threat. The research vessel continued its silent journey through the star-filled darkness. Inside its converted cargo hold, Dr. Aisha Okoye was rewriting the understanding of human potential, one neural connection at a time. The asteroid belt of the Proxima Centauri system became an unlikely battlefield. What looked like a random collection of mineral-rich rocks to the Caraxian long-range sensors was actually the most sophisticated mobile base in human history. Marcus Rodriguez moved between workstations with the precision of a surgeon and the creativity of an artist. Each station was a testament to human improvisation. Mining lasers converted into precision weapons, communication arrays transformed into sophisticated jamming devices, and medical scanners repurposed as quantum field disruptors. "It's not about matching their technology," Marcus explained to a group of young engineers and technicians huddled around him. "It's about understanding it, then breaking every rule they expect us to follow." Their base of operations was the salvage carrier Defiance, a ship that had become more of a mobile research and manufacturing center than a traditional spacecraft. Captured Caraxian technology was everywhere, dismantled, analyzed, and reimagined in ways their original creators could never have anticipated. A holographic display tracked Caraxian fleet movements. Their approach was methodical, almost mechanical. Each expansion followed predictable patterns, scanning systems with mathematical precision. But humans were anything but predictable. Their first major strike came against a Caraxian forward observation station. What appeared to be a simple mining drone was actually a sophisticated infiltration device. Marcus had personally modified the drone's quantum signature to mimic the background radiation of a standard asteroid. When it approached the station, the Caraxian defensive systems saw nothing more than another piece of space debris. Communications specialist Aria Wong intercepted and decoded the station's internal communications. "They're collecting data on our escape routes," she reported, "but they're missing the bigger picture." The resistance had become a living, breathing organism. Each surviving group contributed something unique. A medical research team from a destroyed orbital station provided advanced nano-repair techniques. Mining colony survivors shared expertise in resource manipulation. Military personnel contributed tactical knowledge. Their communication network was a masterpiece of quantum encryption. To the Caraxians, it would appear as nothing more than random noise. background radiation of the universe, but each fragment contained critical information, shared in a language of survival that defied traditional communication protocols. Commander Chen's strategy was unlike any military approach in human history. "We're not fighting a war of territory," he explained during a fleet-wide strategy session. "We're fighting a war of perception." Their attacks were deliberately chaotic. A mining laser would disable a Caraxian communication array one moment, then disappear into the cosmic background the next. Supply lines would be disrupted by what seemed like random gravitational anomalies, actually carefully placed quantum disruptors that looked like nothing more than space debris. Marcus discovered something profound in the captured Caraxian technology. Their systems were designed with a fundamental assumption of predictability. Each defensive mechanism, each weapon system, was built on the premise that the opponent would follow certain logical patterns. Humans did not work that way. A young engineer named Samira developed a breakthrough technology they called a chaos generator. It looked like a simple communication relay, but it could generate quantum interference patterns that would completely scramble Caraxian sensor systems. One moment, it would appear as a standard communication device. The next, it would create a sensor shadow that could hide entire fleets. "They're studying us," Marcus would often say, "but they're looking at the wrong things." The resistance was more than a military operation. It was a complete reimagining of survival. Each captured piece of Caraxian technology was a lesson. Each failed attack, a new opportunity for innovation. Their greatest weapon wasn't any piece of technology. It was the ability to look at a problem and see possibilities where others saw only limitations. A transmission came in from a distant colony. Another group of survivors had found a way to modify agricultural equipment into defensive systems. The details were quickly integrated into their collective knowledge base, another thread in the growing tapestry of human resistance. As the Defiance moved silently through the asteroid belt, Marcus looked at the modified technologies surrounding him. Each piece told a story of human ingenuity, of a species that refused to be defined by its limitations. The Caraxians were hunting them, collecting data, trying to understand. But some things could never be fully understood. Some spirits could never be truly conquered. The real battle was just beginning. The communication network began as a whisper, fragmented, almost imperceptible transmissions that drifted through the vast emptiness of space like cosmic breadcrumbs. But whispers, when heard by the right ears, can become a thunderous roar. Dr. Aisha Okoye watched the quantum communication patterns with a sense of wonder that transcended scientific observation. What was emerging was unlike any form of communication humanity had ever experienced. It wasn't just an exchange of information. It was a collective consciousness taking shape. Each surviving human group brought something unique. A hydroponics specialist from a destroyed orbital station shared advanced agricultural adaptation techniques. A retired quantum computing engineer provided insights into communication encryption. A group of survivors from a mining colony contributed innovative resource management strategies. The Caraxians monitored these transmissions, convinced they were collecting valuable data. What they failed to understand was that they were witnessing the birth of something entirely new. Commander James Chen analyzed the growing network from the bridge of the Resilience. Traditional military communication protocols had been completely abandoned. This was something else entirely, a living, breathing information ecosystem that adapted in real time. "It's like watching a neural network form," he muttered to Area Wong, the communication specialist who had become the network's primary architect. Area's modified communication arrays were works of art. Each transmission was a complex quantum puzzle, information that could only be fully understood by those who knew the exact decryption pattern. To the Caraxians, it would appear as nothing more than random cosmic background noise. But it was so much more. Transmission came in from a group of survivors on a distant research station. They had developed a method of converting agricultural equipment into sophisticated defensive systems. Within hours, the knowledge had been analyzed, adapted, and integrated into the collective strategy of multiple resistance groups. The network was learning, growing, evolving. Dr. Okoye's psychological research began to reveal something extraordinary. This wasn't just a communication network. It was a form of collective human consciousness that defied traditional understanding of information exchange. "We're creating something the Caraxians cannot comprehend," she explained during a strategy session. "Each transmission is more than information. It's a shared experience, a collective memory." Survivors began sharing more than just technical information. Personal stories became a form of psychological reinforcement. An account of loss would be met with collective support. A moment of hope would spark innovation across multiple survivor groups. The resistance was transforming from a scattered collection of survivors into a unified organism. Marcus Rodriguez discovered something remarkable while analyzing the communication patterns. The network was developing its own form of collective problem-solving. A challenge encountered by one group would be almost instantaneously analyzed and potential solutions developed by others. "They're looking for patterns," Marcus explained, pointing to the Caraxian data intercepts. "But we're not creating patterns, we're creating potential." Each transmission was a quantum entanglement of human experience. Emotions, memories, technical knowledge, all became part of a living, breathing information network that existed beyond traditional communication methods. Captain Alina Rodriguez, monitoring the network from her damaged cruiser, began to understand the true nature of their resistance. This wasn't just about survival. It was about redefining what it meant to be human in the face of an existential threat. The Caraxians continued their methodical data collection. They saw transmission fragments, analyzed communication patterns, searched for predictable responses. What they couldn't see was the living consciousness forming between those fragments. A transmission came through, a personal story from a survivor who had lost everything during the initial attack. Within moments, the story had been received, processed, and transformed into a collective moment of resilience. Technical innovations, emotional support, strategic insights, all emerged from a single personal account. The network was alive. As the resilience moved silently through the star-filled darkness, Commander Chen realized they were creating something unprecedented. Not just a method of survival, but a new form of human connection that transcended physical limitations. The Caraxians were hunting them, studying them, trying to understand. But some things cannot be understood. Some spirits cannot be categorized. Humanity was becoming something more. The quantum disruptor weapon emerged from hyperspace like a nightmare made real. Its crystalline structure defied conventional understanding of spacecraft design, a massive construct that seemed to bend the very fabric of space around it. Unlike traditional weapons that destroyed through explosive or energy-based means, this device could unravel molecular bonds across entire planetary systems. Earth hung in the balance. Commander James Chen studied the incoming data with a mixture of scientific fascination and pure terror. The weapon was more than just a technological marvel. It was a calculated instrument of species extinction. Each molecular bond it targeted would collapse in a cascading reaction that would reduce entire planetary ecosystems to atomic dust. "It's not just a weapon," Dr. Aisha Okoye observed, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the threat. "It's a systematic approach to planetary elimination." The Caraxian strategy had become clear. This wasn't conquest. This was complete eradication. Marcus Rodriguez moved between sophisticated monitoring stations, his hands flying across quantum interfaces that looked more like living organisms than traditional technology. The captured Caraxian technology they had been studying suddenly took on a new significance. What had been researched now became humanity's potential salvation. "We've been analyzing their technology from the wrong perspective," Marcus muttered, pulling up complex holographic displays. "They're not just destroying. They're collecting data with each molecular disruption." Captain Alina Rodriguez coordinated the scattered human fleet. Years of military training had prepared her for crisis management, but nothing could have prepared her for this moment. The quantum disruptor's approach meant the complete and total elimination of everything humanity had built. Their communication network, The living, breathing collective consciousness they had developed became their greatest weapon. Information began to flow between survivor groups with unprecedented speed. Each piece of data, each fragment of understanding about the quantum disruptor was immediately analyzed, processed, and integrated into a collective strategy. Area Wong's communication arrays became something more than technological interfaces. They were now living neural networks, processing information at speeds that would have been impossible just months earlier. The Coraxians had a fundamental misunderstanding about their weapon. They saw it as a precise instrument of destruction. But precision requires predictability, and humanity was anything but predictable. Dr. Okoi's psychological research revealed something extraordinary. The quantum disruptor's targeting systems relied on predictive algorithms that mapped molecular interactions. But human molecular structures, influenced by centuries of adaptation, space travel, and genetic diversity, were fundamentally different from any standardized model. They're looking for patterns, she explained to Chen and Rodriguez. But we don't have patterns. We have potential. Marcus Rodriguez's team had been secretly developing what they called quantum resonance shields, a technology that looked impossible on traditional scientific models. By creating a constantly shifting molecular interference pattern, they could theoretically disrupt the disruptor's targeting systems. The first test came unexpectedly. A small human research station in the outer reaches of the solar system became the proving ground. As the quantum disruptor's initial molecular destabilization wave approached, something remarkable happened. Instead of collapsing, the station's molecular structure began to shift, not in a predictable way, but in a manner that defied all known physical laws. Molecular bonds didn't break. They transformed, adapted, found new connections faster than the weapon could analyze. "It's working," Marcus whispered, watching the data streams. "We're not just defending. We're evolving." The communication network amplified the effect. Each survivor group contributed something unique: a medical technique, a geological adaptation, a quantum computing breakthrough. What looked like random data to the Coraxians was actually a sophisticated, living defense mechanism. Earth's defensive systems, which had seemed hopelessly outmatched moments earlier, began to change, not through traditional technological upgrades, but through a collective reimagining of molecular stability. Commander Chen realized they were witnessing something unprecedented. Humanity was transforming from a species facing extinction to a living, adaptive system that could rewrite the very rules of physical interaction. The quantum disruptor continued its approach, its systems processing what it perceived as impossible data. Humanity waited, not in fear, but with a collective determination that had been forged through survival, loss, and an unbreakable spirit of adaptation. The real battle was just beginning. The counterattack began with silence. Not the silence of surrender, but the silence of calculated preparation. Hundreds of human vessels, each one a modified hybrid of captured Coraxian technology and human innovation, moved with a synchronicity that defied traditional military understanding. Commander James Chen watched from the bridge of the Resilience, his tactical display showing something that looked more like a living organism than a military formation. Each ship was connected through a quantum communication network that operated beyond traditional electromagnetic spectrums. Marcus Rodriguez had transformed their fleet into something unprecedented. Mining vessels became stealth platforms. Medical research ships converted into advanced electronic warfare units. Communication arrays doubled as molecular destabilization weapons. "They're looking for patterns," Marcus explained to the fleet's strategic council. "So we'll give them chaos." The first strike came from what appeared to be a standard asteroid mining probe. To Coraxian long-range sensors, it was nothing more than a piece of space debris. But when it approached a forward Coraxian observation station, it became something else entirely. Area Wong's communication specialists had developed a method of quantum signal manipulation that made their approach virtually undetectable. The probe didn't attack, it infected. Sophisticated nano-infiltration systems began to rewrite the station's core operational protocols from within. Across multiple star systems, similar operations unfolded. What looked like random incidents to the Coraxians were actually carefully coordinated strikes that targeted the fundamental weaknesses in their technological and strategic approaches. A medical research vessel in one sector would suddenly generate a quantum field that disrupted Coraxian sensor networks. A mining colony's communication array would become a sophisticated jamming device. An agricultural research station would transform its hydroponics equipment into molecular interference generators. Dr. Aisha Okoye's psychological research had revealed the Coraxians' critical weakness. They understood technology, strategy, and data, but they could not comprehend the human capacity for adaptive, unpredictable action. "We're not fighting their war," she explained during the final strategy session. "We're creating an entirely new form of conflict." Captain Elena Rodriguez coordinated the multi-system attack with a precision that seemed almost intuitive. The human fleet didn't move like a traditional military formation. They moved like a living, breathing ecosystem, each unit adapting, responding, transforming in real time. The Coraxian response was telling. Their initial counter-strategies were linear, predictable. They would identify a threat, analyze its approach, develop a defensive protocol. But human actions defied such systematic analysis. A communication relay would become a weapon. A medical scanning device would generate molecular interference. What appeared to be a standard supply transport would suddenly become a sophisticated electronic warfare platform. Marcus Rodriguez's team had developed what they called quantum chameleon technology. Each human vessel could dynamically alter its quantum signature, molecular structure, and electromagnetic emissions. To the Coraxian tracking systems, the ships would appear to be constantly changing. Sometimes a piece of space debris, sometimes a standard transport, sometimes something entirely unclassifiable. The communication network that Dr. Okoye had helped develop became their most powerful weapon. Information flowed between resistance groups with unprecedented speed and complexity. A tactical innovation discovered in one star system would be analyzed, adapted, and implemented across multiple fronts within moments. The Coraxians had studied humanity for decades. They believed they understood human technological and strategic limitations. They had collected data, developed predictive models, created comprehensive analysis frameworks. They were fundamentally wrong. Humanity was not a species to be understood. Humanity was a continuous process of adaptation, innovation, and unexpected transformation. As the counterattack reached its critical moment, the human fleet moved with a synchronicity that seemed to defy the very laws of physics. Ships that should have been destroyed found impossible ways to survive. Attacks that should have been predictable became something else entirely. Commander Chen looked at the tactical display and saw something more than a military operation. He saw a living, breathing demonstration of human potential. The Coraxians continued to collect data, to analyze, to try to understand. But some things cannot be fully understood. Some spirits cannot be categorized. The battle for survival had become something more. A revolution of potential was unfolding. The final confrontation was not a moment of glory, but a testament to survival. Humanity's fleet spread across the star system like a living network, each vessel connected by something more powerful than traditional communication systems. What the Coraxians saw as a scattered, desperate resistance was actually a sophisticated, adaptive organism. Commander James Chen stood on the bridge of the Resilience, watching the tactical displays that looked more like complex neural networks than traditional military readouts. Dr. Aisha Okoye's research had transformed their understanding of conflict from a linear strategy to a dynamic, living system. "They're still trying to understand us," Marcus Rodriguez muttered, analyzing the incoming data streams. Captured Coraxian communication fragments revealed their fundamental confusion. Each human action defied their predictive models. Each strategic movement broke their understanding of warfare. Captain Elena Rodriguez coordinated the multi-system attack with an intuition that transcended traditional military training. The human fleet moved not as individual vessels, but as a collective consciousness. Mining lasers became precision weapons. Communication arrays transformed into sophisticated jamming devices. Medical research stations generated quantum interference fields that disrupted Caraxian targeting systems. Area Wong's communication network had become something unprecedented. Information flowed between resistance groups with a speed and complexity that made traditional communication look primitive. A tactical innovation discovered in one star system would be analyzed, adapted, and implemented across multiple fronts within moments. The Caraxians had studied humanity for decades. They believed they understood human technological and strategic limitations. They had collected data, developed predictive models, created comprehensive analysis frameworks. They were fundamentally wrong. The quantum disruptor weapon, their ultimate instrument of planetary destruction, began to fail. Not through direct attack, but through a systematic deconstruction that defied physical understanding. Human vessels didn't destroy the weapon. They transformed it, finding molecular vulnerabilities that the Caraxians couldn't comprehend. Dr. Okoye's psychological research revealed the true nature of their resistance. Humanity's strength wasn't in technology or military might. It was in their capacity for adaptation, for finding potential in the most impossible circumstances. "We're not just surviving," she had explained during their final strategy session. "We're rewriting the fundamental rules of interaction." Each human vessel carried more than weapons and technology. They carried stories of survival, of loss, of hope. The communication network was a living memory, a collective consciousness that transformed individual experiences into collective strength. Marcus Rodriguez's quantum chameleon technology reached its ultimate expression. Human ships could dynamically alter their quantum signature, molecular structure, and electromagnetic emissions. To Caraxian tracking systems, the vessels became something entirely unclassifiable. Sometimes a piece of space debris, sometimes a standard transport, sometimes something that defied categorization. The battle wasn't won through traditional military strategies. It was won through a fundamental reimagining of what was possible. Caraxian ships began to fail not from direct attacks, but from a systematic breakdown of their fundamental operational protocols. The human resistance had found ways to infiltrate their systems, to introduce complexity that their linear thinking could not process. Commander Chen watched as the final Caraxian defensive positions began to collapse. But this wasn't a traditional victory. This was a transformation. The communication network that Dr. Okoye had helped develop became their most powerful weapon. Survivors from destroyed colonies, research stations, mining outposts, each contributed something unique. A medical technique here, a geological adaptation there, a quantum computing breakthrough everywhere. What looked like random data to the Caraxians was actually a sophisticated living defense mechanism. As the last Caraxian vessels disappeared into cosmic dust, humanity emerged changed, not just as survivors, but as something more. A species that had discovered its true potential in the crucible of near extinction. Captain Elena Rodriguez looked out at the star-filled darkness. The battle was over, but something more significant had begun. Humanity was no longer just a species trying to survive. They had become a living, adaptive system that could rewrite the very rules of existence. The universe would never be the same, and neither would humanity.